So renewable energy per se is responsible because we are displacing carbon and making sure that energy does not pollute the environment. However, for me, responsible renewables goes beyond just the carbon piece. We look at how the renewable technologies are produced, manufactured, and when you look at that aspect, we look at two broader aspects of the renewable technologies. One is the circularity of those technologies, so that we are not depleting natural resources to produce technologies which ultimately displace carbon. And then at the end of life, those technologies need to be responsibly recycled so that we are not having any effect of renewable energy technologies undermining the very reason why they were brought in the first place. The other aspect of renewables is around making sure that any part of the value chain, the production process, is driven through responsible practices of labor. So the human capital of either producing or deploying renewable technologies should not involve large-scale displacement of people or using forced labor to produce renewable technologies. So to me, the overall responsibility aspect covers circularity, labor, and end of life, in addition to the carbon piece. Well, I think it's very simple, right? We have only one planet. So unless we do something about it right now in terms of our energy and our carbon, it's an existential problem for us to grapple with. So there's enough inspiration for us to do what we're doing. Yeah, so as we said, renewables is perhaps, and specifically solar and biomass, are two forms of renewables which are more democratic in nature as compared to the other conventional sources of energy, which are basically designed around large centralized power and then using grids to distribute. Renewables, solar and biomass can be generated at the point of consumption, right? And so what that drives is a very unique business model where the consumer can own the asset and produce their own energy literally in their backyard. And to me, that is the ultimate form of co-ownership, where people like you and me can generate our own energy. So co-benefit sharing as an example, you look at PM Surya Ghar as a scheme. The obvious benefits is that you're lowering your cost of energy by producing it literally on your roof. At the same time, you also get an incremental revenue stream of selling the excess energy which you can produce but you don't want to consume to the grid company and getting revenue for it. Likewise, in the concept of putting in agriculture and PV into what's called agrovoltaics, where now if you're a farmer and you have fallow land and nothing grows on it, you put a solar project on top of the land, you increase the moisture retention of the soil, start growing some crops, and then you have incremental revenue coming from sale of energy. So that's how two examples of co-benefit sharing. So, renewables, when the technology started to evolve in the late 90s or the early part of this century, they had an inherent social license, because we were bringing in technologies which would reduce the carbon emissions on the grid. However, as the technologies became mainstream and supply chains started to monopolize in countries like China, there were concerns raised around two things, right? One is how much carbon you are spending or emitting to make a solar panel, to make a wind turbine, to make a battery, how much of the mineral resources on the earth you're depleting, how many people you're displacing, and what kind of labor practices you have in certain parts of the value chain like polysilicon, which is extremely labor intensive. And you had evidences of violation of labor laws or how dirty is my wind or how dirty is my solar kind of thing coming in, right? And so I think the whole concept of creating and deploying renewable technologies more responsibly has started to evolve, connected with the monopolization of the supply chains as a direct consequences of monopolization of supply chains in one country. And I think as the world now understands that these practices have to be stopped, we see regulations come in around circularity, around recycling of end use of renewable technologies, which will drive a different behavior in the minds of the customer. Why go to 2050? We are anyway looking at people-centric RE, at least in India, and I think India is taking a lead in terms of decentralized distributed generation, right? Where if I give you an example of let's say projects which we've supported with our technology in parts of Bihar and Eastern UP, where access to energy was challenged. Energy was available but not reliable. And there are people who've started developing distributed mini grids, combining biomass and PV to give on-demand, 3-phase, 24/7 renewable energy, produced locally, consumed locally, right? At a price point which is more affordable than the next best alternative, which is no power, right? So we already seeing, very people-centric, and what that does is that if you get energy into an area which is having constraint of access to energy, you start seeing economic activity and economic growth happening in that area. And that to me is the multiplier effect which distributed renewables can bring in. So couple of ways. I think the number one is building stakeholder awareness around what is responsibility and what is the meaning of responsible. Driving that through the portfolio procurement specifications, because energy is still a regulated topic. So ultimately, the concepts of responsibility and circularity need to find its way into the capacity procurement which happens in our country and internationally also, right? The second is, once you define these and create the stakeholder awareness, making sure that standards, and there are global standards available for, let's say, circularity, for monitoring, let's say, the carbon and water footprints which go into manufacturing of, renewable energy generating technologies or batteries. And so how do you value that aspect as somebody goes and starts procuring, bringing in those standards and essentially driving the procurement in the right direction, right? And so raising consumer awareness, and I'm not talking retail consumers, I'm talking about institutional consumers and regulators and people who lend to these projects need to really understand and appreciate what is responsible, right? And how do they drive it into their financing agreements and their, procurement agreements. So to me, that's the immediate need of the REI.